Giant Jim and the Hurricane. Now you all know what a giant is, don't you? Yeah. But who can tell us what a hurricane is? What's a hurricane? Yes. Well done, you're absolutely right. It's a very fierce wind. Not just a fierce wind, but it's a very big wind, a huge wind. Sometimes it can be about 100 miles across from one side to the other. And it swirls around and in an enormous whirlwind like that, very, very fast. And it can be very dangerous. It can pick up whole houses and just throw them across into the air. And luckily, we don't get hurricanes in our country, but you do find them in some places in the world. And you certainly find them in this story, so I'm going to read you a little bit from the very first chapter. There was a very strange noise coming from beyond the window. Constable Dunstable sat up in bed and scratched his head. It was 6:30 in the morning. What could be making such a noise? He went across the window. There you can see, here's the policeman, Constable Dunstable. He's got his policeman's hat on and he's wearing his 999 pyjamas. He got out of bed, went across to the window and pulled back the curtains. Constable Dunstable leapt back. Staring through the window at him was a huge face, with a ginger beard as big as a forest, and the face belonged to a head, and the head belonged to a body, and the body had 2 long hairy arms and 2 huge legs. "It's a giant!" cried Constable Dunstable. He ran downstairs and across the room. He opened his front door and he ran outside, right between the giant's legs. And he carried on, running and running, still in his pyjamas. "There's a giant in our town!" yelled Constable Dunstable as he hurried through the streets. Windows were thrown open. Sleepy people poked out their heads to see what all the fuss was about. "Well, I never," murmured Mrs. Sniffling. "Constable Dunstable is running round the streets in his pyjamas. He's shouting something about a giant." "A giant?" sniffed Mr. Sniffling, and he sat up in bed. "I don't believe in giants." "I think you might believe in this one," said his wife, "because this giant is standing at the end of our road. He is as tall as 4 houses sitting on top of each other, and he's holding a giant saucepan in one hand and a giant basket in the other, and he's got a giant saxophone strapped to his back." Mr. Sniffling growled and climbed out of his nice warm bed. He went across to the window. "Ah!" he cried. "A giant! There's a giant in our town!" "Do you know that is exactly what Constable Dunstable was saying?" said Mrs. Sniffling. "Look, now you're running round in your pyjamas too." It was quite true. Mr. Sniffling was racing down the street in his night clothes. In fact, almost half the town were rushing about in pyjamas and night dresses, and they were all shouting at each other. But there's Mr. Sniffling in his striped pyjamas. Here's Constable Dunstable. "A giant, we shall all be squashed," cried Mr. Sniffling. "We shall all be squished," screamed Mrs. Goodbody, and she hurried across to Constable Dunstable. "Arrest that giant at once," she insisted. Well, Constable Dunstable looked up at the giant's big ginger head and swallowed hard. He was an awfully big person to arrest. "I shall have to put my uniform on and get my handcuffs and my giant spotter's handbook. Then you can all come with me and we will arrest the giant and shoo him out of our town. We don't want giants here." "No, we don't want giants in our town," everyone shouted. "What's wrong with giants?" asked little Poppy Palmer, the farmer's daughter. But nobody listened. She thought the giant looked rather nice. The crowd marched off behind Constable Dunstable, and they waited patiently until the policeman had changed into his uniform. And when Constable Dunstable came back out, they all got up and marched behind him once again, and and that helped him feel a bit braver. There's Constable Dunstable in the front, and look, all the townspeople have still got their night clothes on. They went up the road, and there was the giant, standing at the other end, and frowning down at them with his great big bearded face. A crowd stopped. Mr. Sniffling pushed Constable Dunstable forward. "Go on," he muttered. "Arrest that giant at once." Constable Dunstable took 2 wobbly steps forward and then stopped, and he had to press his knees together very hard to stop them shivering. And he said, "Up and up and up. I arrest you in the name of the law," he cried. "Put on these handcuffs at once." Well, the giant looked at the tiny handcuffs. They were much too small for his great big hands. So he carefully put down his saucepan, and he put down his basket and gently held out his hands. And Constable Dunstable just managed to push the handcuffs over the tips of the giant's fingers. He snapped them shut. "There," said Constable Dunstable. "Now you're our prisoner. I'm going to put you in jail for years and years and years." "But I haven't done anything," said the giant. And his voice was such a roar that half the townspeople were blown back down the road, and the other half fell over on the spot. Constable Dunstable picked himself up. "It's against the law for giants to come to our town," he said severely. "That's not very fair," said the giant, and everyone fell over again. Constable Dunstable picked himself up. "And you keep knocking everyone over." "I can't help it," said the giant, and everyone fell over again. Constable Dunstable picked himself up for the 3rd time. "In that case, I shall have to put you in jail for ever and ever," said the policeman. And that was when the giant began to cry. Huge tears filled his eyes, trickled down his cheeks, and crashed to the ground far below. "Stop it!" cried the soaking townspeople. "We shall all drown!" That made the giant cry even more, and it was just like looking at 2 long, thin, sparkling waterfalls. The giant cried for half the morning. Soon there was a little pool of tears, and the pool became a pond, and the pond became a lake. Some people got out their umbrellas, and some people got out their boats, but the children got out their swimming costumes and swam about, happily splashing each other. Mrs. Careless, the mayoress, was becoming most concerned. "We can't have this," she told Constable Dunstable. "We must do something. This lake will start overflowing at any moment, and then the whole town will be flooded. Tell the giant you won't arrest him if he stops crying." So Constable Dunstable told the giant to stop. "I won't arrest you," he explained, "but you must promise to be a good giant." "I am a good giant," snivelled the giant, and he blew his nose.